Hey, listen, we got some things that we gotta discuss. How we can affect the system and make it better for us. But first, we gotta start with the man in the mirror. Open your third eye and the vision's gonna be much clearer. We are revolutionary. We are visionary. And we stand resolute on those who pollute the minds of many. Revolutionary. We are visionary. And we stand resolute on those who pollute the minds of many. This is the Revolutionary Social Work Podcast, y'all.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Revolutionary Social Work Podcast, episode 11. I am one of your hosts, Alicia.
What's up? I'm Ace, your other host.
And today we thought we would do a bit of a story time. I was reflecting on our different paths in social work, and I wanted to get into that a little bit more, because we've had pretty different histories, experiences getting into social work, into the degree, getting into the profession, and to where we're at now. And well, we met in grad school in our Masters of Social Work, and that was pretty much my first experience really in social work, doing my master's, doing my practicum, whereas you had had years of experience before that.
Well, yeah, but I think it's important to mention that it's almost like a moment, an instance of fate that we met, right? We met at a summer course at Hawaii Pacific University that only lasted a week or 2 weeks or something. I can't remember.
2 weeks. It was a 2-week course.
2 weeks. And the only reason that I was in that course was because my first choice, the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where I was accepted, out-of-state tuition was very expensive. HPU is pretty high too, but the difference is HPU didn't have in-state, out-of-state, so it was kind of in the middle. Whereas University of Hawaii at Manoa had really expensive out-of-state tuition and really low in-state tuition. And I didn't have a way to pay for it. So I had registered to start classes in the fall, but I had no way to pay for it. I took those HPU summer courses, or that summer course, as a backup in case I was never able to figure out how to pay for University of Hawaii. And then the day before classes started, I got a message saying I got a graduate assistantship, which meant that my tuition would be waived, and I was able to move over there. So it was like I went to that HBU class just to meet you, because I didn't even do the homework in it.
You didn't do any of it?
Wouldn't say I didn't do any of it, but I definitely didn't do that final project, which was kind of funny anyways, because I basically chose the final project.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do remember that.
I started talking about flowcharts and stuff, which was some of my least favorite things, but I knew about them. And so, let's just do she was South African. Huh? She said, let's just do
She was awesome.
Let's just do a flowchart. Yeah, I didn't know her that well, but she was cool. I think that's cool to do things like not have everything preordained.
Yeah.
And she basically came up with the final assignment based upon what she deemed from our discussion and what she learned from us students on what we needed. And I think that's the exact way that it should be, and it's often not.
It was a really small class. There was only maybe 4 of us, I think, and we were put as partners one time. Yeah, maybe it was even about that project. I don't remember, but you had to leave kind of suddenly. That's kind of funny to think back about that class. And that's where we met. I'd already done a year, I think, of social work. Yeah, because I was on the 2-year master's program, and then you were coming in for advanced standing. I'd already done a year, but I was fresh in social work, that's for sure. That is for sure. And before that, what was your, you'd come from your bachelor's of social work, right?
Yeah, I did my BSW where I'm working at now at University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Yeah. Okay. And my bachelor's was in criminology. Any social work students out there, we all come from different degree backgrounds. Some of us have done social work for bachelor's, some of us have not. I did criminology and American studies. I've, for some reason, always been very interested in America, kind of planned to be here more longer terms. I did that with my criminology degree, and then I went into social work.
You often hear of people that are more down my avenue, that as far as social workers go, social workers with traumatic backgrounds, with a lot of trouble and whatnot, and then they use that experience, they want to help other people. And I'm not saying you didn't have any trials or tribulations. By all means, we all do in different ways. But you didn't necessarily have that road of, like, say, drug addiction, or being oppositionally defiant, or failing out in school, or any of those things that many social workers have often gone through. What made you want to be a social worker? I know it had something to do with finance, like you did. You were in that and you didn't like it.
Yeah, well, I think it goes before that. Before I'd wanted to be a teacher for most of my childhood. I really wanted to teach elementary school. And then I'm not sure, I think it changed when I was in A-levels, when in England, the UK. I'm not sure it's exactly the same now, but you kind of finish high school age 16, and then you can choose to do 2 more years, which you would need for college, and that's your A-levels. You only choose about 3 or 4 subjects, and I chose psychology as one of them. And learning more about psychology, things started to pique my interest, and they resonated with me from, like you say, I haven't had the same experiences as you, definitely, but as a lot of social workers, anxiety has been something I've dealt with for a very long time, and other mental health challenges in my family. I think I was resonating with those things that were coming up in psychology. I planted a seed, and then I did criminology and American studies, couldn't find a job. When I came back to Guernsey, the little island I'm from, the Channel Islands, went into finance, and that was when I realized I was working a job 9 to 5, able to save a lot of money, but I had no meaning or purpose that I could think of in relation to the wider world, other community members. It just didn't fit right with me. And I explored other options. Where could I go? And I started volunteering at a youth center. And then that again piqued that interest of I want to work with people, and I want to have some sort of meaning and purpose, not just transferring money around the world. I want to be able to do something. I think that's where it came from. There was, relatability with my own kind of mental health and my family's mental health, but just realizing that I could do a lot more in the world than just sit behind a computer and move money around. No offense to anyone that's in finance. It was just that's personally how I felt. I know there's a lot more to it in that introductory finance job that I was in. There was nothing that could have kept me there long term. Yeah.
So when you think about it and reflect, and maybe you haven't thought about this in this way, but a difference between someone like social workers like you and I would be that most of the clients, say wherever you were working at, but like say your job as a therapist right now, I'm sure you meet a variety of folks from Southeast Alaska, right? Is that I've probably been in most of their houses, not these specific people, but like I have the life experience as whereas, say you're talking about a drug addict or something. I've definitely been in there and seen all that and at firsthand, or poverty or domestic violence and things like that. And I've seen all that stuff, I've seen the worst of the worst, I guess. And I hate saying it that way, but it is. It's how, I guess, how do you close that gap, or how do you think about it when you're working with folks that, and we all would to some degree, we don't know everybody, and I'm over exaggerating my experience, but I'm saying, how do you, what if you want to say bridge that gap, or how do you meet them where they're at when you've never seen where they're at before?
I think that's a really good point, and I wanted to talk about that today because I have come to the conclusion for myself. I think it is important working with someone who is going through substance abuse challenges. For example, we'll just take that one. I really think it's important for them to work with someone who also has some sort of experience or some sort of relatability that they can just feel in their shoes a little bit more than I can. And that took me a while because at first I was like, we should all be able to work with everybody. And of course, I would never push someone away, but I do think it's really important for someone to be able to connect with someone else who has some sort of experience that relates to what they're going through. And I think substance use is a huge one like that. Other things, I think a lot of things in Alaska anyway stem from trauma. And I have a pretty strong trauma foundation in terms of my training. And I go from that. That's how I would bridge that gap, especially with substance abuse, because I think there's a lot of trauma there for a lot of people involved in their substance use. That's how I bridge it there. But I do really try and connect people with someone else who has a similar experience or has been working in that field for a very long time or has a path to social work that really came from that substance use area. I don't know if that's if everyone would have that perspective, but that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I'll challenge you on that, actually, how you talk about substance abuse, for example. And I think it's hard for me to encapsulate all of our conversations in the past. But when we first met, we would have conversations about how you didn't understand substance abuse and you kind of lumped them all into one often and didn't quite understand. For example, when you tell me somebody was on drugs or going to rehab, but you wouldn't really be able to distinguish between whether their parents caught them with marijuana or whether they were shooting up heroin. And so when you talk about how people struggling with substance abuse, that they should most likely see somebody that also has been through that. I'm not disagreeing with that somebody obviously with substance abuse. But like if you take mine, and we can get into that in a little bit, but my substance abuse or my drug use is much different than, say, somebody who is a heroin addict and has been for a long time. I'm not saying I can't empathize with them at all, but I wouldn't quite relate to their experience. And my experience as a drug user, as some would have called a drug addict back then. It often doesn't reflect many of the myths and ideas, and it's much different to many others. And I think there's just as much diversity within people that abuse substances or have problems with using drugs as anyone else in the world. I think that also that many folks' problems with substance abuse, if not all of them, stem from something else. We often look at like addicted to heroin as that they got addicted because for some reason they tried it and they got hooked on it and they stuck with it. But really, it's got to be much deeper than that. I mean, to be willing to slam heroin through a needle into your arm, you got to be going through a lot of different things to get to that point. And same thing with me, where I was using methamphetamines, but it was a certain series of events had to happen for me to get there, and it wasn't what the common ideas. And I guess my point here is that I think that there's a ton of diversity in there, and I think that folks that haven't had substance abuse problems themselves, I think could most definitely be useful. Perhaps they might not understand certain context or certain situations or certain ideas or certain experiences from the drug user or the drug addict. But certainly they can help them, and they can look at some of the underlying problems. And just like when you say, you wouldn't say, I can't work with anyone that has trauma if I don't have that same trauma. No. You wouldn't say that. And I think that your lens regarding substance abuse is similar to that lens that you had before. And it's something that's unfamiliar to you, which is reasonable. You don't quite understand all the nuances of it. But I don't think that means that you couldn't help an individual, and that individual could get, say, therapy from you and go to recovery meetings or have other folks that help them.
I think that's where I'm distinguishing, though, because like I said, trauma, I think, is underlying a lot of things. I wouldn't push someone away in that sense, and I think I could definitely help in a lot of areas. But when we're talking about someone's actively using, and you're right, there's such diversity in that, in the use and the substance and what that looks like. Working, I think where I'm at now, we have a behavioral health side and we have a substance use side within the organization. And the substance use side is very much focused on early intervention and then relapse prevention and those sort of things. And I think that the side where we're focusing more on the trauma, the underlying factors, that's where I feel it's comfort level. It's familiar to me. It's comfortable. Working on the other side, in my mind, the perspective I have, I think it's the unfamiliarity, but I still believe that connection, because I've talked to clients about this as well, where they've connected deeply with someone who has had somewhat of a similar experience with addiction in general. Not exactly the same substance, but addiction. And they've been able to connect on that level when they're talking about their own addiction. Whereas within my sessions, that hasn't been my strong point.
Yeah, well, one place that I would agree with you is there's been plenty of folks that I've worked with or talked, and even if I wasn't working with them, but I talked to them that say they were, let's say, heavy addicts. And when they hear my story, or they hear that I've overcome that and where I'm at today, you often see a light shine in their eyes, and they're kind of like, look at me like, really? And then I think they're able to possibly see themselves in me, and that gives them a little bit of hope, I guess you might say. And I've seen that several times. But again, I wouldn't say that because you don't have substance abuse history, whatnot, that you couldn't be effective. And I would look at it, a little differently than you're describing it. I think that certainly, the experience I was just describing can be meaningful and whatnot. But that doesn't necessarily, because they see that in me, doesn't mean I'm going to be able to help them. It might give them a glimmer of hope, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be effective at working with them. It could, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. I think the bigger gap that you don't see is because you literally never seen it before. Take this character that's a drug addict that is coming to see you for whatever reason. I realize you don't do home visits or anything right now, but let's just imagine that you did. Whereas if I would have went to their house, I would probably look around and I would look at it, in a reflective, critical way of things that I've mostly seen before. Whereas I think that if you went into that house, the houses I'm imagining, it would be a while before you got over the shock because you have never seen those things. And I just think that that's where it comes up for me. So yes, I think it would take a while for me to get over that shock. And I don't think that's appropriate for me to go through that process in that client's life. If they could have someone that doesn't walk into it with that shock. What if they don't, though? You don't think that you could be? What if there's nobody else? What if you're the one? Say we're talking about rural Alaska. You are the person available. Just because you don't have that experience, it means that you can't help that person find a pathway. And that's a good point. And in rural Alaska, we don't have that many options. And so oftentimes, yes, you are working with individuals who you may not feel as familiar with
different challenges, different experiences, different mental health situations, just different. And we don't have the wide range of providers to be able to connect people with best fit. And I use that very loosely. I think if there is though, would you not say that that would be the ideal situation?
Yeah, but it makes me think about, I have a couple angles I wanted to think about because I'd never thought about this before. And so I'm not sure if it happens, but like the idea of like cross-pollination in social work therapy. So like say you have a client, but you also have somebody that's somehow in your network. I mean, obviously that could be your job, but maybe some kind of bigger network, right? To whereas I'm working with this individual, but I don't have experience with substance abuse and whatnot. So you're going to draw upon the skills and the experience of this other therapist or this other person that's involved in substance abuse or social work, for example. It could be even people without degrees, and then they would help you in that. And so I don't have to answer that question. I just think I'm not aware of anything like that. Are you, between therapists?
Between therapists? I mean, it happens.
Probably happens, especially like within an organization where they're providing it. But I wonder if there could be some bigger kind of a form of networking, and it probably runs into the same bullshit problems that we always have, like with billing and how do people get paid and things like that.
But I think what you're saying is, because this does happen, and I think this is where it has not strengthened, because I'm definitely open to changing and evolving my perspective, but this is, I think, more solidified my perspective right now, because I've seen so much benefit of working with another therapist alongside, we're working together, and they have some sort of specialty and I have some sort of specialty, and then we work with the individual together and we both bring our specialties, and the client benefits so much from that, rather than me doing all of it and perhaps not giving them everything that I possibly could. So I think it happens in substance use. It happens for pain, for example. I'm trained in chronic pain and so work alongside another therapist who may be doing a lot of the other work, but they couldn't do the pain reprocessing that I'm doing because they're not trained in that. They don't have the experience with that. So I then bring that to the table while they're still working with that therapist. I think maybe that is why it's solidified in my mind that this model is very effective, and it gives people, kind of meets all their needs without stretching you past your scope or your competency.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, and it makes me feel good to hear that it does take place more than I would have imagined it does, and I would like to see that expanded on. And maybe I don't know about certain things, but I would be more interested in how we can, expand that if it needs to be in the future.
Networking.
But I also think, like if we're taking that perspective that you're the only one there, we also in the day of, even in rural Alaska these days, most places have high-speed internet. Maybe not everywhere, but most places do. And there's Starlink, which is maybe not super high speed, but enough to facilitate meetings and Zoom meetings and things like that. And say if you're a therapist working with somebody who's struggling with substance abuse, you could just be honest and have an open conversation with the individual. Hey, I don't have the experiences. I think that there's definitely ways that I can help you, or we can work together to find solutions, but we need to find other folks as well that can empathize with you and that have that experience. Maybe they need to go to some kind of recovery meeting, and maybe they have local ones, but they also have, like I said, the internet, so you can maybe connect with some folks, and then they get a sponsor on the side or some equivalency of that, and then some kind of other folks that are helping them, supporting them, mentoring them with that experience, that are helping what they're also working with you. I think we have to be creative, and we have to be outgoing, which we're not always in social work, right? We just kind of sometimes offer the services that we offer, and that's that. And I get it, because there's not a lot of incentive, but the incentive just has to be social work values and doing the right thing.
It does. And that's why I think this goes even larger, because I don't think we can't be everything to everyone. That's where I think it's important that we're able to, and not to think badly about ourselves, that maybe this is past our scope or our competency, that if we do network and we do have these connections, which is easier in an organization, other challenges, but versus private practice. But private practice, you can still network with other therapists. Just don't think we cannot be everything for everyone.
Reflecting on our conversation, I actually have personal experience on the other side of this. Going to see therapists, and all therapists or counselors or whatever, they don't all disclose all of their experience. Don't know for sure what their experience was. However, I would guess that they didn't have experience themselves with substance abuse or drug use and addiction. And when I would go to see a therapist, which has been a handful of times over many years, and it's never really stuck for me. Probably seen like 10 therapists over 20 years for a few times each, if that, maybe one time for some of them. But oftentimes, let's put it this way. We can talk about again this later, but I went to rehab, and I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about after that. I'm talking about after I had I shouldn't say resolved, but day-to-day drug use at that level was long past and long gone and not a current threat. I know that a lot of Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step NA jargon and sayings and stuff will say that you can never get away from it and whatnot. But I would challenge that to some degree. And I'd go talk to this counselor, this therapist, right? And it doesn't matter. It could be, I remember I saw one at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I was lonely my senior year. It was cold. It was dark. I saw one. I saw a couple in Hawaii at different times. And I would always mention my drug use from the past. And each and every time, without a doubt, that counselor or that therapist would be unable not to focus on that. I didn't come here for drug addiction. I didn't. Like, I've dealt with that a long time ago, and I didn't come here to talk to you about that. But everything, they would frame it that way, almost always. It's like it's like, you just don't get it, do you? And then the other side to that would be that it's always looked at as a negative experience. Mm-hmm. And there were definitely negative experiences and negative consequences to my drug use. But it wasn't all bad. And actually, I don't think I ever become the man I am today without having had gone through that. And maybe I could have went through it in a different way. And I'm not saying everybody should go use drugs or anybody should go use drugs to get there. It was my own personal path that I didn't choose, that I went down this road, and it's one that I took. But it wasn't all bad. And I did have some awakenings as a result of being involved in all of that. It puts me at a interesting point, both talking to a therapist and as like a professor of social work, is that, do I be honest or do I tell the truth? And then people are going to say, but you're basically encouraging people to use drugs. But I'm not doing that. I'm just speaking the truth from my experience and my reality. Yeah. And that shouldn't encourage anybody. You should be able to understand that my experience is my own.
It's unique. Yeah. And I think that whole idea, and from meeting you, I was able to get to this point of, when you asked about how do you bridge the gap then, is the readings that I've done on Gabor Mate and how he talks about what is right about the use. What is the gap that is being filled? And that's definitely how the route that I go with anybody that I'm working with that does want to focus on substances is, what is it giving you? What are the positives that it's giving you? Because then we can work out what is the gap that it's filling. Because without knowing that, how do we have long-term healing and recovery?
Yeah, in my opinion, Dr. Gabor Mate is a revolutionary in this regard. His ideas have been revolutionary, and they're a bit even dated today. I mean, his book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, had to come out 12 years ago or more. Yeah. And if you teach substance abuse, or even you want to know more about it, he has a bunch of short videos that you can just go on YouTube and just search great. Dr. Gabor Mate, The Power of Addiction. But he says the thing that I think is just revolutionary in the way to think about it. He says it in his book. He says it in videos. You can find it everywhere. But he says a lot of people come and they'll ask, he's working with these hardcore drug addicts, like the hardest of the hardcore, people whose bodies are failing themselves because they use drugs, not just somebody who's using casually or just became addicted, people that are full-blown opiate addicts, shooting up heroin for decades. And he'd say, most people would say, like, why would you do that to yourself? Why would you use so many drugs? Basically, why the drugs? Why? Why would you do that? And Gabor Mate would say, well, that's the wrong question. You should be asking, why the pain? Because nobody is doing that to themselves if the other option isn't worse for them. And it may be hard for, like you said, that you don't understand, because you haven't been there. But like in my experience, for example, I was fucked up long before I started smoking meth. The meth, there was a series of events and paths that took me to that point. But I was messed up already, and I had a lot of problems. That is true for all, if not all, drug addicts. And Gabor Mate would say actually that 100% of the hardcore drug addicts that he's worked with have been majorly abused and mostly sexually abused. When you look at that idea of why the pain, we get past this stigmatization of drugs that's been century in the making in America and the world based from America. But we get away from this idea that it's just this decrepit act, that it's just the drugs that can take over us. It's not the case. To get to the point where substances are going to take over your life like that, you got to have some kind of hole in your heart, hole in your soul, some HOLE. You're not whole, WHOLE. There's a hole there. And in order to fill that HOLE hole inside of us, inside our heart, inside of our souls, whatever, you got to fill it with something good. But most of us don't. We fill it with food and alcohol and sex and drugs and things like that. Why the pain? Going back to why the pain. Trust me, the people wouldn't be using so much if the reality wasn't more painful than whatever all the damage and problems that they're doing to themselves. And that was me too. Like I said, I had problems beforehand. And if you were to look back at that person when I was actively using methamphetamines, if we were honest about it, you'd have just saw a boy, a young man who was still a boy that had a hole, H-O-L-E, in his heart. And I didn't fill that hole completely from getting clean or whatever, sobering up, not using, or going to rehab or any of that. Filling it up took years and years and years. That's what I mean. Even when I wasn't actively using those same substances, those problems still kept resurfacing in different ways. Until I was able to kind of deal with those things and fill that hole, that H-O-L-E, I was never able to become completely whole. And I struggled in many different ways and got arrested again, had problems with alcohol after all that. And it was always going back, it was always hard for me to talk to folks about it because they were never able to, from my perspective, look at it from a reasonable, rational, reflective perspective. It was always this idea that drugs are bad and they're the primary source of what we should be dealing with. And
I wonder whether that, because at the beginning of our relationship and that early period, I didn't hear you talk about the addictions or arrests or anything like that very much at all, even to me. And now I hear you talk about it more. You talk about it with your students. You talk about it on the podcast. We talk about it more. And what has changed there? What has opened that up for you?
Well, I'd say the easy answer was that I've become more whole, W-H-O-L-E. And that stuff isn't a hole, an H-O-L-E in me, or some kind of dig or some hit at me. Or I would say that I was very insecure about it and I was ashamed. I thought, even like say meeting a potential partner or a female, I wouldn't talk about it because I would assume that you would judge me and you would look down upon me for those things that I had done or been through. And same thing, would be terrified that like a job would find out about it or that this or that, or I would just be full of shame and guilt. And I think shame is actually the better word. I'd be ashamed of it. And it would be the looking glass self where I would imagine everybody frowning upon me and looking down upon me because I had troubles a lot of my life. I always had this idea that that's the way that folks look at me. Therefore, in a way, that's how I saw myself based upon how I perceived other people looking at me. And I think as I've filled up that H-O-L-E, that hole, and become whole, W-H-O-L-E, I have a family, a beautiful family. I have a wife, partner. I have children. I have roles. I have a little bit more money. I think that I went through a transition of confidence and security to where now I look at it as in two different ways that I think are valuable. One, I look at it as part of my resume, a notch on my belt. You know what? That was some hard shit that I went through, and it's personal experience, and I have it. And like we said, it helps me relate to other people. It helps them relate to me. My story can help other people overcome things. It can give them hope. I can use the way that I've overcome things to help other people, sharing the story. I can use it in a ton of different ways like that. So I guess I didn't explain that very well. But on the one hand, I look at it as experience, resume. And on another hand, I look at it as a story that should be told and that can help liberate other people and help other people that maybe have had similar experiences or see things the same way. And we can find unity in that. Yeah. I guess those would be the two things that have changed the most, would be my perspective on those. And I'm happy to talk about it. And I don't think there's anything anybody could take away from me for that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That security is so big because it gives you, like you say, now you know that you have these things and you feel more whole. The security to be able to live in that space and to, even if your nervous system feels more secure and more relaxed and more grounded, that you can then share this story that it does connect you with other individuals. And it doesn't, I think, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but you sharing has not brought about more shame. People haven't thrown shame at you or had a ton of negative comments, right? More that you share. Would you say it's been the opposite of that?
Yeah, I haven't had anybody I guess I've had a few comments here and there, little subtle comments that are kind of shameful a little bit. But for the most part, it's been extremely positive and I've enjoyed it. I think the reason I wasn't able to tell those stories before is because it was from a sense of a deficit. I looked at it as something negative, as something, the H-O-L-E, something that was bad, a deficit. And now it's like, it goes from like standing inside of a hole to standing on the hill.
Yeah.
And I have confidence, I'm brave, confident that nobody could knock me off of the hill. Whereas before it was kind of like I was worried people were just going to throw the dirt on me and bury me, and I'd have to hide. And now I can do it with confidence. Like I said, it's a notch on my belt. I've been through that, and I'm happy to share the story. It's a part of my history, and it's something that can definitely help other people, and it can help me understand other people. And the more I talk about it, the better is the way I look at it.
Exactly. And from what we've talked about, it was somewhat a crazy life. that you were living. Have any crazy stories you want to share?
I don't know. There's a lot of crazy stories in it all, and it's always a balance between glorifying experiences like that versus reminiscing or whatnot. And I mean, that happens. I remember the first, I was in rehab for 28 days or 26 days or something like that. And I remember it happens in there. You start talking about things and you start glorifying because they're the exciting experiences sometimes. And I don't want to do that, or nor is that my intention, but I think it's worth talking about it. But I don't know if it's good for me just to start with stories. Maybe we can come back to that. But maybe I could tell a little bit of a story of how it happened to me and how I got away from it.
Yeah.
And then if you want to know about stuff in between, some of the crazy stories, maybe we can circle back. But I think my first step in the direction of drug addiction was simply having a troubled life in different ways. And I don't need to go through all that, but I was just a troubled individual. I almost looked at myself like I was cursed. Just having that state of mind, didn't have confidence about myself or my life and things like that. So that's the first step. The second step was my failing out of school and not having certain support that I needed. So through a series of events, failing, not going to school, I basically was out, of high school. Went to an alternative school, and a lot of things were positive about that. Just work at your own pace, and I graduated and did really well. On the other hand, people that often go to alternative schools are other people with trouble. It gave me a network of troubled individuals. And those were all my friends, and they were good people, and a lot of them had very good hearts and unfortunate circumstances. But it put me in this network, and all kinds of things from, we knew where to go buy beer. We could go down by the river and drink, psychedelics, marijuana. None of those caused me any real problems back then. And then, long story short, there was a friend of mine, actually pretty much an extended family that I'd gotten to know. And this particular friend, his mom had just gotten out of jail or prison, I'm not 100% sure. And we were outside, they had a trailer, like a camping trailer outside, and we'd sit out there and we'd smoke weed and cigarettes. They smoked cigarettes, I didn't smoke cigarettes. Smoke weed and they'd smoke cigarettes, and we'd sit out there, chill, talk story, play cards. And then one day, my friend comes and he's like, hey, my mom's downstairs. And it's hard for me to remember the language that was used or whatever, but basically she's got something different. She wants to know if we want to get high. Went down there into the basement. His mom's cool. She was always cool to me for years after the full-on drug addict, not a great mother in a lot of ways, but I'd say that there was some beauty in her heart, believe it or not, when I talk about these things. But anyways, this lady's down there, my friend's mom, and I don't know if I'd met her before. Maybe I had, but if it was brief, she just got out of jail. And she had a light bulb, and I watched her, and she did something where she shook out, so the light bulb wasn't white anymore, it was clear. And she put some white stuff in there. And at this point, I hadn't even done or been around cocaine or anything, so I really didn't know anything of what I was getting myself into. Put it in there, stuck a pen in there, lit it, but melted the shit in there, and asked us to hit it. And I think they used the word spracked or sprung or things like that. And that's exactly how I felt right off the bat. It was like some of the insecurities I had just shattered at that moment. And I became confident, and my brain was flowing with ideas and wanted to talk about all sorts of things. It was an extremely positive experience. And matter of fact, I think with my friend's mom that just got out of jail, we didn't do anything nefarious after we used the drugs. We sat and we talked story about positive things and reminiscing about their family that was in jail, other family that were in jail, talking about things that we would do, things that we wanted to do. We were teenagers, most of us, just almost all positive experience in that regard, besides, using illegal, illicit drugs. I would use occasionally, it's hard for me to remember exactly how much, but just occasionally on the weekend, I'd go with that same group and I'd smoke some meth with them and different places, and we'd be the night, and I'd go home and go to work on Monday, and it's what it was. I can't really exactly articulate or remember exactly how it went down, but there's a slow change, and I think basically it could go down to this, is that one weekend, I don't remember exactly, but it went something like this. Got high on Friday night, stayed high into Saturday. If you've ever used meth or learned about it, that it's not a drug that is one and done. It's going to last for a while, especially if you're continuously using it. And the next day came around, Saturday, kept doing it, Sunday, and you keep doing it, you're having a good time. Well, and if you're staying up all night Sunday, you really don't want to go to work on Monday. Or if you do, you're going to feel like garbage and not want to be there. Basically, I can remember the weekend that happened for me. I was at the friend and the mom. I was at her sister's house, my other friend's cousin's house. And I ended up staying there, and I ended up living there for a long time. The auntie, the original mom that I got high with, sister who I stayed with then, her name was Marla, and she passed away since then. But she was addicted to crack, and none of us used crack, we used meth. And she was a major drug dealer. And I became like her right-hand man in a way. I was more responsible than a lot of the other kids around for some reason. And I had a work ethic in a weird way in that regard. And I was trustworthy. I was riding high. You had free drugs and a lot of respect. And Marla got arrested and left, basically. And I didn't have that source anymore. And it wasn't very long that I went from being I shouldn't say top, but being a powerful, respected, well-off drug dealer and user to sleeping on a porch where it was cold and I didn't have anywhere to go. I'd walk around. I had 2 pit bulls named Mario and Killer. And I loved those dogs. But anyways, they would just walk around town with me, and I would go and sometimes get high with other people and sometimes have a place to stay for a while, but eventually ended up sleeping on porches and stuff. And then I had a somewhat fortuitous event happen where, I guess in that regard, I ran into some friends and found out that there's this guy that owned a car shop that he liked hanging out with people like us. Went over there, and I stayed there for a while. It's hard for me to quantify in times, but I stayed over there for a while, got high, we did our thing. And then this other guy got out of prison. I remember his name was the Goose, as they called him, the Goose. He's this big fat guy. And he came over, and he was like a little bit more hardcore, like criminally, than most of us that were there. And anyways, it was big. All this stuff went down. And eventually, the guy that owned the car shop and that guy, the Goose, they both passed out. And I robbed them. And I stole all their meth. I stole all their weed. I stole some cash. And I went, and I was like, this is it, Ace. You're going to be back on the top. You're going to be selling back where you were at. No more of this, sleeping at other people's places or on the streets or whatever. And I was going to go and I was going to sell all that stuff and buy some more and work my way up. And the reality was I went to this house. And if I back up a little bit, just a little bit, to when I was still just casually dabbling in this, I had a friend. His name's Bubba, and he's probably still around somewhere. But he asked me to come pick him up at a house. And I went there, and it was a total drug addict house. It was disgusting. And I was like, Bubba, what the fuck are you doing in a place like this, man? I'm just chastising him, making fun of him. Well, after I stole all that stuff, I woke up in that house about a week later. All those drugs were gone. I'd shared them. I'd been a dumbass in that way. And I woke up and I felt terrible. And the lady who ran the house, she's this, I don't know, this lady, she had an oxygen tank on and always carrying an oxygen tank and always smoking weed and always smoking meth and giving it to all sorts of kids and teenagers all the time. It was a crazy, crazy place. But anyway, she asked me, said, Ace, go to the store and get me some cigarettes. And I think was it, cigarettes. She gave me $10. And I walked and I was going to get her cigarettes and something in me and I just kept walking. And I said, I'm done. I don't have this in me anymore. I'm done. And I went and bought, to show you my idea of nutrition, I bought a box of donuts, a dozen of them. And I ate about 1.5 of them, and it started to make me feel ill because I hadn't been eating really well. And I put them down, and I kept walking, and I walked to the hospital, and I checked myself into rehab. And I've probably only seen, in all those years, that was 20 plus years ago, I've probably only seen methamphetamine one time since then. Never even come across it since. But that's a bit of my story, and you got the beginning and the end of it, I guess.
I think it's important that you share that and that you're ready to share that, because as your partner, it makes me emotional hearing it, just because I can imagine you at that time. And when your brain switches and you're set on something, you go do it. So imagining you walking to the store and getting those donuts.
I remember just one short story when I was walking around homeless with the dogs. I ran into a couple friends of mine, and one of them was, everybody had their nicknames. His name was K-Swiss for some reason, I remember. And the police came over and they were like, what are you guys doing? And they wanted to know about me for some reason specifically. And I just remember I wouldn't answer their questions. And I just remember K-Swiss sticking up for me. And they were like, and the cop was just tell us where he lives. That's all we want to know. Where does he live? Where's your friend live? And he's like, wherever he lays his head, I guess. What's it to you? I just remember wild experiences like that.
K-Swiss. Gosh, how does that, when you went to rehab, and you've spoke a little bit about your experience in rehab on the podcast before, but coming out of rehab, where was your mind at? Do you remember?
Yeah, I just wanted to do good in life. Same thing as I wanted when I was using the meth, to be honest with you, before I used the meth. But I really wanted to, and it was a unique time in recovery history, if I'm honest, mine and just the world's and the town that I lived in. And recovery was very strong. They had Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, which both had huge presences. And it was just before, obviously like the internet boom. Internet existed, but it was before the boom of it all. Mm-hmm. Maybe we just had flip phones and things like that. And there were meetings everywhere, and they were friendly, and they were young. I was just young at that time, 20 or something. And they were young in that way. There was lots of young people, attractive people, you know, so you could go hang out and stuff without. Because that's one of the hardest things. A lot of people, when they get out of rehab or whatever, many of them have to go back to the very place, like their family, where they use the drugs. Yeah. But even me, I really struggled with community and friendship and stuff like that. Trust me, like when you quit and you go try to go back to people that are using drugs, they'll gladly welcome you and be very happy to see you. It's always a temptation in that regard. Yeah. But fortunately for me, I had family that maybe they didn't understand me, but they definitely gave me somewhere to be, somewhere to stay, supported me in that way. And I would walk around and go to all these meetings, and there was this place called the Madhouse that just had recovery meetings 24 hours a day. I mean that, seriously, AA and NA. And people, it was back in the day, people just sat there and hotboxed the basic thing with smoke with cigarettes, and always coffee going, always something going on there. And it was interesting and it was fun. They would have dances all the time. They would have like camping events. They would have, every Sunday they had softball. So pickup softball. So it'd be like 50 people there to go play pickup softball with the barbecue. And it was just really good times. That first years, that's what carried me, was all those people for sure. Yeah. And all those opportunities to go somewhere else. Because I promise you, I'm not a good person to be lonely. And I can be solitary, but to be lonely in such a way is very hard for me. And I would have went back for the friendship, and for sure.
That is such a key part of recovery, is making that community. And it may need to be a new community, like you're saying. And how do you help people get to that point if they don't have that at all? If they don't have that option, or they don't have family where they can rest and have a safe place to live, and the only option is to go back to where they were using. Yeah,
that's a real shitty option, and I really don't have much to say. And I've seen that happen several times, and I've seen all of those people fail. Yeah. I'm not saying it never exists. Actually, I have one friend who his mom was not one of the women I was talking about, but another major drug dealer in town. And I don't know what he's doing today, but about 10 years ago, I'd seen him, and we played a little softball when I was in town, and he was doing really well, and I actually went to visit his mom with him, and it was the same thing. They were all still using it. He did. I mean, he wasn't living there, but that was his people, and he did it.
Yeah. It's the minority that could do that, though, right?
Yeah, and I think, you often hear with this that I disagree with, is that a change of environment won't change you. And it's true. If you take all your problems to another place, your problems are just not going to go away. Yeah. But I disagree with it. And I think oftentimes when we look at problems, not just with substance abuse, but in America, period, you talk about people don't like this politically, or people don't like this politically. We should use our agency and leave then and go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And I've done that. I'm an example of that. I didn't like Utah. I'm not saying I don't like it at all, and I don't like anything about it. There's a lot that I love and reminisce about it all the time. But it's not for me. And I had to leave, and it was hard to leave. And I had to make big jumps a couple times. But I'm a believer that if you don't like your circumstances, then change them. To bring it up at almost every recovery meeting, whether it's AA or NA, at least in my experience, they close in a very beautiful way. You gather around in a circle, hold hands, and say the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I usually literally used to pray to God and say those in different words, in my own words. And it's great because it shows you humility. And a lot of drug addicts want to change everything, and that's part of their problem. They're addicted to power too, right? It gives us humility and realizes that we can't change everything, and that we should accept some things and change what we can. But then the class with Angela Davis in grad school, and she would say, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I can no longer accept. And I think the danger in the serenity prayer is sometimes it makes us accept things that we can change, and that we do have the power to change. And what you're talking about, whether it's our family, because I've done this too, or friends, or ways of being, or ways we feel, or our history or anything, we hold on to those things so tight, like they're a part of us, but they're not. I mean, not saying your family's not a part of you. It's all different levels of it. Yeah. But if your family is using drugs and you have this problem that's got you put in prison, it's made you unhealthy physically, or you're going to basically end up in jail or dead if you don't get out, well, it would make common sense that you don't need that to be a part of you, at least until they find out what they need. And it would make sense for me to get out. And I'm a big believer in environmental changes. And if you don't like living with your drug addict mom and you don't like winters in Utah, well, there's lots of other places out there in the world that maybe don't have as cold of winters and have different, that your mom's not there or whoever it is that we're talking about. And there's other people there, and you can create your own path and your own destiny. It's hard. It takes a jump in the dark. It takes belief, but it does. It's totally possible.
And I think an important part of your story in this sense is a lot of people may say, well, okay, yeah, I see things that I want to change, but I don't have the resources to do it. Like, I don't have the money. But I think a lot of it is mindset too. It's not like you left with a ton of money. You hardly had anything. but you had the mindset of, I'm going to change this and I'm going to do something different. And then you did, and you found ways to get about getting financial support, getting housing, getting all of that stuff, building community. But if your mindset hadn't changed, then you would never have been able to do that. You could have had all the money and the resources, but if your mind was stuck in this is the way it's going to be and I have no other option, then you still wouldn't have left. Surely it's a mindset thing over anything else.
Yeah, I mean, look at what folks had to do back in the day, not that long ago. They had to they had to get on, some people got on a ship, not having any real idea of where they were going across the sea. Even to like take a trip from east to west coast, you had to jump on a train and go vastly into the unknown. Or even before that, riding horses over the horizon or something like that. We've become kind of sissies in that regard. And I don't mean like each of us individually, but the way we look at it, society, like, okay, you're stuck and you can't do this. And you're, even like when we're talking about oppression or something like that. But you don't need much money to buy one bus ticket and head west, for example. It's totally possible. And if you have this idea and you're manifesting some different kind of future for you, it may not happen exactly like you wanted or intended it to. But I promise you, if you bought the bus ticket west, that's just one example, but if you bought the bus ticket west and didn't have much else, and you approached it with a sense of authenticity and determination, I can guarantee you will do it. I moved to Honolulu, Hawaii with $1,000. If any of you know how much it costs in Hawaii, it costs like $300 like for one room for a night for many places. Maybe you could find one for like $200. I went there and just said I was going to make it work. And I had some money coming up on the horizon that was possible to come up. But I went there with $1,000 and I bought two vehicles, one for like $300 and one for $500. And I resold them for double the money, basically. And it was hard and I was stressed about it at times. And as a matter of fact, I had the person I was living with at the time was hounding me for the money, and I was trying to sell this car so I could pay him and making excuses. But I did it. And I think no matter what that path is or what you need to do, there's lots of different places out there in the world for us. And if what you're doing ain't working, don't look at it as something you can't change. Obviously, it would be better if you could head west on the bus with some more cash in your pocket. But if you ain't got none and you don't see a way to get it there, then go ahead and change your stars. And over there in the west or wherever that equivalency is, you might be able to enter a different stream of consciousness, a different path, connect with different people. All those things, the universe works in mysterious ways. It will put the right people in your path, but you can't put the people on your path if you never got on the bus and went west.
Yep, exactly. And what can you tell us about how you then got from coming out of rehab, going through that year, the madhouse, and then getting into social work? What was the direction there?
Yeah, I was unemployed for some time, not that long, but maybe a year, for, I don't know, maybe less. It's hard for me to remember. But looking for jobs, and I've always been the person, like, some people talk about work ethic and being proud of going to do jobs that they don't like. I'm the opposite of that. I don't want to do a job I don't like. And so I went over to work at a good example. They had a place called Autoleave, making an airbag factory. And I went over there for like 2 days, and I was like, there's no goddamn way I'm ever doing this. And I'm not dissing people that are there. Everybody's got to do what they got to do. And different people have different skills and different strengths in different ways. But I hated it, and I knew I didn't want to do anything like that. And I was on this search for what would work for me. And it's funny that I actually I saw this advertisement for, I always wanted to be a movie director, film director, and I saw this advertisement for Columbia University. Actually, it's Columbia College Chicago. They do a lot of film and stuff like that. And they were taking 2 special applicants that didn't have the normal backgrounds that you needed to get in. And they wanted to do it based on potential, and they wanted you to write an essay or something. I can't remember, write something out. But I've always been a good writer, and I wrote this up, and to my astonishment, because I'd never been, I remember going to an early college thing at school, in high school, and everyone looked at me and laughed at me, like, why are you here? To get accepted to something like that was a really big deal. And I packed up my car, and I was going to go, and my mom talked me out of it. And I always wonder what would have happened if I'd have went.
Because
Something
to everybody,
different.
Ace is an exceptional writer. I've never met anyone that writes like you.
But anyways, different path, different day, whatever. I didn't go. And at the same time, my dad's friend said, you should go apply over here at this group home. They're my friends. They'll hire you. And I was like, there's no way they're going to hire somebody like me to work with kids. Long story short, they did. I was good at working with kids. I am able to work in a way that's honest and authentic and respectful that I don't see in everybody else that works with kids. And it did a lot of work. It did a lot of good for me. And I ended up being recruited to work at a larger treatment center, worked there for a while, ended up moving to a different treatment facility called Cottonwood Treatment Center, worked there for several years. And I was really good at what I did. I was really bad. When I look back, I had a lot of really poor behaviors. But when it comes to the essence of what social work is and working with youth, I was really good at it. And it showed in just about every way. And I worked there for several years, no college education or anything like that. And I basically realized that I had nowhere else to go. I was supervising this 100-bed facility, no other real experience or education. And I decided to take a shot in the dark and moved to Barrow, Alaska, now called Utqiagvik, and was working for the Arctic Slope Native Association. And I think I just I just signed up for college classes that were generals, and I didn't know what it was. I don't think I even knew what social work was as a term.
Go there for social work?
No. They hit me up and said, hey, one of the professors hit me up and said, hey, you're in the class. I heard what you were talking about, and I think that you'd be great for our program. Would you ever think about this? Did that and recruited into the social work program. And they have a rural cohort. It's mostly full of Alaskan natives, but they invited me to participate in that, so I'd fly down there and participate with other rural Alaskans.
And is this where you met Grandmother Rita?
Not in the rural cohort. I was part of another program, which is a whole other story, but it's called Rural Human Services that I did. Started that just a little bit before. Same kind of thing. I was invited to participate, mostly Alaskan Native individuals. We did stuff via talking circles. And yeah, Grandmother Rita was one of the facilitators, the talking circle facilitators or the elders in the circle early on. And I could come across her numerous times in that regard over the next couple of years.
Yeah. And my goodness, how much that's shaped, like how you practice social right now.
Yeah, for sure. More how I practice education, to be honest with you. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah, true. And then after the bachelor's, that's where our lives then collided in the master's program. And when I think we both had different experiences as well in that master's program, because I came out of it, I didn't quite know what I wanted to, really where I wanted to go. I really didn't know myself much at all at that point. But you had decided social work isn't quite for me, or the direction that they were pushing you in anyway. Right?
Yeah, in a way, I was really disappointed with my education at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And this isn't a complete diss on it, because I had a lot of good experiences, and there's plenty of good folks, students, professors, all of that. There's plenty of good experiences. But as a whole, I was disappointed. I felt like I went into the master's ready and charged, and I'd been reading all kinds of things, and I had imagined graduate school in social work to be like this place of ideas where we talked about all these new things. And Dr. Gabor Mate was that's that book that In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts had just come out. Dr. Carl Hart, he's got a newer book out called like Drug Use for Grownups, but the old one was High Price, about how we've responded to drug addiction. Anyways, I came with all these different ideas, and I thought it was going to be a place that was fruitful of such things and that fostered such things. And I didn't find it to be that. I found it as primarily using the banking model of education. I went there, they had some information to deliver to me, and that's what they did. And not in every circumstance, but in most. And the other part of it was I felt that I had these ideas of grandeur, like I said, I went through treatment, I supervised the juvenile treatment center forever, and I wanted to do something like that, something big and grand, and help people and create this or that. And I didn't feel that the program or the education there in any way prepared me to do something like that. And instead, what they tried to do was funnel you into either being a therapist or a caseworker. And I didn't want to be neither of those things. All props to you. I think I'd be good in therapy in some ways, but I'm not your guy to sit there for 8 hours and do something like that. I'm not. I'm somebody who needs to be doing something different, more hands-on, creative work. I was disappointed in that way. I remember in our cohort at the end, everybody had to stand up and say what they learned, I think, among other things. Yeah. And everybody gave really good stories. I remember one guy that I kind of frowned upon and didn't connect with, but I was really surprised and impressed with his connection to the people with mental health problems that he was working with and tying it to a suicide in his family that he'd experienced and stuff. And I was like, wow, I'm glad that I heard this. I learned more about what motivates this guy, and gave me a little window into some of the stuff that he'd experienced. And so I appreciated it. Other people talked about these profound things that they were going to learn. And I shouldn't say everybody, but most of the people looked like I just killed somebody or something. And I said, the biggest thing I learned is I don't want to be a social worker. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but the gist of what I said a minute ago, and everybody frowned at me. And I remember my professor gave me the look like, really? And I think that's a problem with me, is I don't always talk about things, but when I do, I have a problem not I guess it's a problem for others maybe, but I just have to speak my truth at sometimes. And a lot of people don't like that. I've come across more times folks feeling threatened or acting a certain way based on me saying the truth about how I really feel in my experience. And it's like, well, what do you want me to do? Lie and make something else up, or not?
Because you're so
not
authentic.
tell the truth. And that was the truth. And I got pulled back into social work through being a professor. I wanted to teach, and I was still interested, and a series of opportunities and whatnot came, and I ended up being a social work professor. And in many ways, I'm really good at that, depending on what your values and ideas are as a teacher or a professor. Work keeps choosing me. I don't choose social work. It chooses me.
It does. It continues to choose you. And I think I came out of, I was at Hawaii Pacific University, and there was, again, it didn't offer a lot of the just diverse classes that we were looking for. Like you never found out about how to start your own business in social work, how to do social work slightly differently aside from a case manager or a therapist seeing 8 clients a day. Didn't go outside of the box at all. But I did leave there, and I got very much caught in the idea of, well, I need to just go straight to my LCSW so then I can prove myself as a professional and I can be able to help more people, and having the DSM as my Bible, and I can diagnose all of these things. And I think it really gave me confidence in that way I can do something with meaning and purpose, but I can also be in this respected position where I have this expertise and knowledge and I can help someone with it. And I think it just added to my confidence. But now looking back, I feel somewhat embarrassed of that individual that had that perspective, because I think it's very much different now, where I don't believe that having the DSM as our Bible is that hugely positive and respectful.
You better not have the DSM as your Bible.
I know, right? I think it was such a, like, you have it here, and like a doctor, you almost feel like, well, I can now label this thing for you, make it make sense for you, and we can heal everything in your life. And some of that, I know there's some people do somewhat resonate with having a name for something so that they can understand it. But I think we rely so heavily on it in social work as an LCSW. And now I've got to the point where I am so against pathologizing everything, because you could look through the DSM and you could put a label on every single individual in your life. And I don't think that's helpful at all. And going back to what you said before about finding that whole, HOLE, and then finding wholeness with that WHOLE is the key to it. Rather than pathologizing it, why we should focus more on wholeness. That's where I've come, definitely from graduating with that master's, and I was on that route of pathology. And now my mindset has shifted so much to, now we're looking at wholeness. Now we're looking at human experiences and our fellow humans. How do we work together and create that wholeness? But it took a while from that master's level to get to this stage of my life now. I think yoga has a huge part to do with it, the whole 8 limbs of yoga.
Well, I think the very idea of DSM is contradictory and counter to social work values, at least what they should be. So social work would recognize the value of the human and the individual. So I know about humans, whether you're black, perceived to be black, white, male, female, somewhere in between. Well, you're a unique person with very unique traits, unique things. Different things have happened to you. You have a different experience than anybody else in the world, different genetics, different everything. And then what we do is we create this book full of boxes that we made, and we try to force everyone into those boxes. But they don't fit into that box cleanly. Even when you're talking about something like ADD, well, like, sure, there's some similar symptoms, but it could be anything. Like, I don't agree with the DSM manual at all. And I think what I get from what you're saying and reflecting on it is what I feel about a lot of different things in social work is that same thing with social work education. We're talking about you go there and they give you some information that's been pre-prepared, pre-curated for you, whatever. And they give it to you and you learn it. And you take some tests, right, all the way through, whether your test could be writing a paper, it could be a final exam, it could be the clinical exam or the licensing exam that you do afterwards, right? There's all these things to prove that you have obtained and took in the information that they gave you. One example would be the DSM. Another example would be the Code of Ethics. Well, we as social workers, how it's presented to us is that these are things that are given to us that have already been chosen and decided. In Social Work 101, you review the Code of Ethics, the NASW's Code of Ethics. But very rarely do you ever scrutinize it or be critical of it or redevelop it or generate your own. So as far as social work ethics, well, I would imagine that your ethics should be a little bit different if you lived in Utqiagvik Barrow, Alaska versus if you lived in New York City. Different values exist in both of those places. They're different. Why would social workers have the exact same values? And why would they just take what's given to them by a national organization? Why would they not? Are we not creating our own values organically, together, collectively? Same thing with the DSM, right? If you're the social worker, a therapist, and you have life experience and intellectual experience and whatever, and you go and you're a therapist and you have to use the DSM. Well, what if you read something in the DSM that is directly counter to your own personal experience and you're like, I know that this isn't true and this is not an equivalence of this. Well, you still have to use the goddamn thing regardless of that. So it doesn't really teach much critical thinking if you're supposed to disregard your own personal experience, wisdom, knowledge, whatever, because somebody wrote this down in a book.
Yeah. And when you say, like, why are we not doing things differently? Because not wanting this book to lead all of our practice, sure. But then when we're trying to work with insurance, you have to have a diagnosis from the DSM-5 right now. You're kind of tied to this situation where we are being forced to pathologize someone's human experience. And the way that in supervision especially, it's not that I just throw the DSM out. It's definitely not, because we have to use it if we want to connect with insurances to give access to people who have insurance. How can this experience that someone's going through, how can it best be described in the DSM? Then okay, that's that. But then what? Then how do we help this person in their human experience become more whole? And we talk about this all the time, right? The nutrition, look at that. How are they moving their bodies? What is their spirituality like? What is their community like? What are they taking in from the media? What are they listening to? All of that. As long as we don't forget that part and we use this book, this DSM-5, as the tool that it should be, well, hopefully it can change in the future. But right now, it connects us with insurances a lot of the time. As long as we use it that way and not just to guide our whole practice and then just read word for word exactly what it recommends, and we continue to think critically and we continue to think of whole human beings rather than pathologies that we need to slap coping skills on or slap whatever on. I think that's the key difference.
Yeah, I just think that the complete idea of the DSM is complete bullshit. And I don't think that, like, for example, there's one specific example that's very easy that most people should be able to work out in your minds, is that we have long had a problem with drugs, substance abuse. We've been talking about it in America, right? I don't have time to go into all the history of it and everything. We've long had a problem with substance abuse in America. And part of that problem stemmed from the way that they were represented and the propaganda and whatnot that went out back in the days all the way up to today. But right, so when you talk about something like marijuana, it was presented as, go back and look at Reefer Madness, look at the way they changed the spelling to make it look more foreign, the way that they applied it to black people and made them invincible. There's a million different pieces of evidence historically that show that. Marijuana gets, because the powers that be want to use it against people, they make it up here to be this terrible thing and they represent it. And then they even use this scheduling thing they call scheduling, whatever they call it, substance abuse or the scheduling of substances, of illicit substances. They base it based on therapeutic value or something like that. I can't remember exactly how it goes. But so you have this ranking where marijuana gets put at the very top, despite it being shown that, it's literally available in many different states as medicinal use. For example, in the state of Hawaii, it's not legal to use it recreationally, but it's legal to use it medicinally. Obviously, there's evidence that show that it can be useful medicinally, but it's still sitting up there on the Schedule 1. Using the DSM manual means you have to forego any sense of logic or anything in that regard when you're using such a scale that's given to you by the U.S. government. So we talk often about evidence-based practices, right? Why do we let it go here? Why do we dismiss it here? I don't like to get into huge arguments about things, but if you align or you think that the DSM or the United States scheduling of substances is accurate or useful or any way to diagnose, to prescribe, to help people, then I'm sorry, you got to dig a little deeper and you need some reflection. So we ram evidence-based stuff down our throats in school, right? In graduate school, I remember, everybody's doing research projects from like seeing if equine therapy can be useful to whatever, right? You have to be evidence-based to prove that equine therapy can be useful, right? We know it could be, and we know it might not be in other circumstances. It's pretty common sense, in my opinion. But then we have something like this that's obviously bullshit, but yet we're still going to go with it, and we're still going to use it for everything on all our documents and stuff, because we really don't care about evidence-based practice. And the other thing that really bothers me about the language that we use, we're talking about, we can't do it because the insurance company, we can't do it. We can't do it. And it goes back to the whole
like that.
I'm not saying it's not a reality of the current moment, but as long as we continue to look at it that way, then we're doing we're refusing Angela Davis's advice to us, and we're just accepting it as something we can't change. But why can't we change it? We're the social workers. Why?
Yeah.
Why is the NASW doing partisan political endorsements, but yet this is still going on? Like, why are we not addressing these things? They're not even a topic as far as I know.
No, I mean, I think that there's always topics of what should be in the DSM and what shouldn't be, and it's evolved from the first DSM to the current one. The current way that we're doing things, that we have to tie something to a diagnosis from the DSM in order for it to be billed to insurance. I've never heard that talked about before, to change it.
Well, essentially, we're not trained to be good, thoughtful, critical, reflective social workers. What we're taught to do is to be sheep and say, "There's somebody prepared, or a group of people prepared this DSM manual for it.
Yeah.
Here, use it, and don't think critically about it." And matter of fact, most times when I, in social work venues, am critical or put up a resistance against something, I'm just looked at it as a rabble rouser, and you're disrupting our flow of what we got going on. We're not taught to question these things. It's not encouraged to question these things. We're taught to be sheep in that regard. The point is this: spend tens of thousands of dollars minimum, maybe $100,000 on education from a BSW to an MSW. You put all this time, this effort, you do internships, do all these hardcore classes, and you do it all. You go and take an exam afterwards, all of these things, right? Well, if you went through all of that stuff and paid all this money, how is it that we cannot educate people to the point where they're able to look at, say, if you work with substance abuse individuals, that you don't need a page in a book prepared for you to determine whether or not they're a drug addict or not, but you can actually make that determination without any literal scale. By talking to them and looking at them as an individual, unique human being, then we can determine that, versus, okay, you use this, fill out this for me. That's what I did when I didn't mention this, but after I got off meth, I got into a bar fight and had to go to jail for a little bit of time, and they sent somebody in to do an assessment of me. And do you know what they did? They didn't get to know me at all or know anything. They had me fill out these things, and then they made a recommendation or whatever, which was totally inaccurate. I could have just lied on there or whatever. It doesn't make any sense. It's illogical. You do not need a scale. I'm not saying scales cannot be helpful in any situation, right, but for the most part, it's just like, again, trying to shove people into boxes that were created beforehand that people don't fit into. All drug addiction is not the same. It's vastly different. People have vastly different experiences.
Well, I think this is the trap that we've talked about before. Again, the standardization and the professionalization of social work. We're trying to be something that we don't have to be. We're trying to be way more scientific than we have to be. Our work is an art, and our work is based on humans and human experiences and human connections, but we're not sitting in that environment right now.
Social work should be looked at as more of an art, and instead it's reduced to a profession. Yeah. It's an art that's reduced to a profession.
It's such an art because everybody is so individual.
Even if you take Social Work 101 or some kind of history of social work course, right? And where they teach you the history of social work, it's going to start with like Jane Addams and some lady. Like that's the day that social work was invented. Really? Nobody was practicing the art of social work before that? And that's the only way we're going to look at it, is in this as a professionalized thing. I just completely disagree with it.
Yeah, so many people practicing social work way before that.
Before now that are not social workers. It's just not reduced to the guidelines of a profession that's created by other people.
Yeah.
And look at all the things that things are reduced to. You mean in some cases, right? Best case, social work as an art is like picturing, Daniel Mate talking and going on a walk through the city or through Central Park or through the beach and having our friend Natalia is doing this. I think I saw her advertising it. Going for walks, doing things like that. Whatever. There's a million different things that you can do. Yeah. And what does social work often get reduced to? Some person sitting in a cubicle talking to somebody on the computer that lives in a different place than them, talking about another thing that I feel like we just accept too easily, like the interstate compact. I could see the benefits, and we're inundated with them all the time. People want to talk about the benefits of them. But in my opinion, the reality of the interstate compact is the end result based on corporate power is that rather than, you being able to move somewhere else and take your clients with you, not saying that will never happen, But the real way that it will be used is that I talked about working at that treatment center in Utah. We didn't have Utah kids. We had kids from everywhere else. Why was it in Utah? Because Utah was a cheaper place to operate. It's going to have corporations setting up shop in Utah, Oklahoma, wherever, other states where it's cheap to operate in. And those places are going to be they're going to train people on how to be culturally competent. And then they're going to be working with rural native Alaska natives in rural Alaska that they know nothing about, that they're for sure not culturally competent about, with whatever. And that's what it's going to be reduced to, is instead of doing, the insurance won't cover your walk on the beach for various reasons of whatever, but they will cover Joanne working in a cubicle in Oklahoma, working with somebody in Nome, Alaska, an Alaska native in Nome, Alaska.
Yep. Yeah. Money. And I think if you're interested in this topic, Charla, who we had on the podcast last time, episode 10, did a great job of explaining how we can imagine things differently and how we don't need to accept insurances and go that route. But for a lot of us, including myself, we are a part of organizations who do accept insurances, and that's where we're at this point in our career. But I just think it's enjoy looking back on our paths through social work and when we get to now, because even in this conversation, I feel like I've evolved my perspective on things a little bit. It's important for us as social workers revolutionary social work is about that inner work, to reflect back on our paths and to look at where we've evolved in our thought processes and in our practices. It's important, and we should be doing that constantly, but oftentimes we just get so up in the work that we don't take the time to think about it.
Yeah, well, the current culture in today's climate is counter to that. So we're on here having this robust, sometimes enthusiastic conversation. You could come back and watch this 2 years later and you could say, look at Professor Stettler, or look at Alicia, she was saying this, and I heard her say this the other day, which is counter to that. And that's the way we look at it in today's world. But the reality is that's the worst case scenario. If I show up here 2 years from now and have the exact same ideas and say things the exact same way, it means I haven't done any reflection. It means I haven't had any growth. It means that I haven't learned any new information that informs me. In today's world, it can be scary to talk about things that are counter to the status quo or don't go along with things. And you're going to be scrutinized more than you're going to be celebrated a lot of the time. But if you don't do that, then you can't do what we're doing. We couldn't have talked about this, and where you say, well, I feel like I moved forward a little bit. And last week we talked to Charla, right?
Yeah.
And she challenged a few things, and I was like, I feel like I moved a little bit forward, a little bit closer. Yeah. And I don't look at things the exact same way. So I participate in something to that regard for the next 365 days until next year. Obviously, if I came as the same exact person saying the exact same things and having all the exact same opinions, ideas, then I really didn't do much work.
Exactly. Yeah. We need to be constantly evolving. We have to.
Well, we're not perfect, but you have to be willing to be able to talk about things and to think about things and reflect on things and bounce things off one another.
Yeah.
Otherwise, how are we ever going to get?
Yeah.
How are we ever going to get anywhere?
Exactly. And because even that conversation we were having at the beginning about working with people who are struggling with addiction, if you haven't been through addiction before, I think my general view, we're all humans, we're all humans living a human experience and having human challenges. And when we meet each other on a human level, then not too much can go wrong if we keep going in that direction. Both we're fellow humans living in this world together. Oh, what have you been through? Going through this. I think that's why I'm going to constantly evolve on that perspective and my comfort level and where I feel like I can best help people. And again, I will say we cannot be everything for everybody. And I think if we can have more of that network of social workers working together and helping people, that's optimal, because your strength may be my weakness and my weakness may be your strength. And together we can create more wholeness. Fill that hole.
It's been a great time talking story with you, Alicia, but I think we better wrap this up and move forward on our day. We wear many hats and we got a lot of things to worry about. There's a lot of things to do.
There are. Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this, do subscribe. Check out our other episodes. Give us a like. And we'll be back for episode 12.
Do we have anybody scheduled?
I don't know if we do. It'll be a surprise. Someone might pop in. Yeah. All right.
All right, everybody. Take care. Peace.
Peace.
You've been listening to the Revolutionary Social Work Podcast, and we just want to say thank you for your continued support. You can catch us on YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify. Remember to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share our content with the world. But most of all, never forget to keep being revolutionary. Peace.